Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Brian. We're going to wrap up today with another new track. This is a brand new single from Slift, who we have checked out before only on live stream, I believe. This new single that came out a couple of weeks ago is called Ilion? Lion? We really need to use better fonts that differentiate capital I's and lowercase L's. I am seeing now on the album art there that it is Ilion, although the N they use on the album art looks like an H to me, so I'd have to use two sources to know the title of this track. Anyways, little rant aside, let's dive into this and see what Slift is bringing to the table today. So many conflicting ideas. I have no idea where we're going with this. At first I thought it was going to be pop or electronic, and then it was noisy. Now it's kind of alt-rock. The production is really interesting though. I really love the drum work. This is definitely one of those songs you gotta crank the volume on. It's interesting, the dueling guitar solos is a nice touch, but I think what's more interesting is that one of the guitars is more of a traditional hard rock adjacent style of solo, and the other one's closer to psychedelic. It's interesting how this not entirely relaxed moment is a point of relief because they just push the tension so far past it. Yeah, real fun polyrhythm right there. Sorry. Love hearing the bass get a little bit of the spotlight. You know what's wild too? As sort of fun as the song has been up to this point, it has been a tense nightmare atmospherically. The drums have lightened it up a little bit, kept it driving, but it has just been uncomfortable. Fantastic effect, great atmosphere. I don't like the way I'm feeling.
They forgot that they got lost in a never-ending circle of death and love.
I like how they accomplish their wall of sounds. We'll get into that later. bonkers. It's just all right. There's two main things we gotta talk about here. First, drums. I had mentioned that I love how they formed their wall of sound, and I think this is going to be a bit unusual. I'm curious if other people heard this too. A lot of the times that we listen to Wall of Sound, whether it's post rock or post metal or even black metal at times, it's very guitar led. It's very much building an atmosphere with the fuzz and distortion of your guitars. We even hear this in shoegaze. This is different. To me, the wall of sound is predominantly built up by the drums. They're the biggest sound in the wall of sound. And in order to utilize the drums as a foundation for consecutiveness of noise, right? I mean, that's the whole thing of a wall of sound, is that there aren't any spaces where you could look through or over or below the sound. There's no space or rest. It is just constant noise. It's really easy to do that on a guitar, especially when processed through all the distortion techniques that they utilize, the overdrive, um, the compression. It allows you to strum once and really allow that sound to ring out for quite some time without losing its width and size. The same isn't true for drums. They're percussive instruments. You hit them once and you get your initial crack, and then the reverb is typically going to be natural. The sound wave will naturally dissipate, and the acoustics of the room will cause it to lengthen or shorten depending on that. Unless you distort or amplify the drums after you've recorded them, you don't really get an opportunity to lengthen it out. Your one hit is going to fill up the space of about a beat and a quarter, a beat and a half. And so to fill space like this as the primary foundation of the wall, there needs to be a consecutiveness of attacks. And so the drummer has to put a lot more effort into being the foundation for this wall of sound. And I think it's a really interesting decision to go about. The guitars certainly go in this direction. That moment, about 8 or 9 minutes into the track, when I mentioned, hey, this is a really interesting way to build the wall, go back and listen to that. The guitars are playing these suspended notes. They've strummed once and are just allowing that sound to fill the space and for the note to just ring out. The bass is in a similar area. There's no vocals at this point. But listen to the production of the guitars and the bass, and they're quiet. They're not filling up a lot of space. The drums are the most dominant sound in that moment, and they are just going off like crazy. They have to. It's the only way they can fill space. They don't have the luxuries of the guitar. And it caused me to look at quite a few of the wall of sounds that are presented in here, and they're all built in a similar way. They put a lot of emphasis and weight and responsibility on the drummer to fill the space that typically a guitar would do easily. I think it's an interesting way to go about it, but what it does, at least for me, is it transforms the wall of sound from a singular, unbroken monolith, right? So like when I hear guitar wall of sound, I think of like just a sheet of metal and it's just blocking my sight. But when the drums were doing it, it was more like a brick wall. I could see where the whatever that stuff is that they put between the bricks in order to hold them together. You can see between the bricks themselves. You can see the cracks. Um, and through that, it feels warmer. It feels more human. And I think more importantly is I can understand the effort put into the performance to achieve it. And to me, it makes it feel heavier. When I hear wall of sound guitar work, all that fuzz, all that distortion, you see them strum once and then that's it. Everything that you're feeling, the weight, the pressure, the size, the presence, is all from digital effects. And it absolutely works in the moment. You know, you listen to it and you're like, man, this is just such a heavy sound. But here, listening to the drums do it and really fill out that space, I don't know, it feels heavier. And I think it's because I can hear the human effort put into achieving this. It makes it more palpable. But the drums also do something else in here aside from the wall of sound stuff, and I pointed it out pretty early in the track, and the drums never disappointed throughout. They just have some really cool patterns. They have some really strong grooves in here as well, and I find that even as tense and heavy and that the song gets, the drums keep it semi light. It never really reaches a point where it becomes dancey or uplifting or anything like that, but it definitely takes on a bit of levity compared to the atmosphere. And I found myself bobbing along, moving to the music in ways that what the guitars and bass and vocals were doing certainly did not allude towards. I think that if the drums had been any more functionally written without any of the embellishments, I think this song would have come off as immensely draining. And it is a heavy song, emotionally and sonically, for sure. But I didn't walk away from it feeling completely wiped out as I have with bands that have done similar things. And I want to put a lot of that on the drums. They keep things fresh and create some levity and just are overall a joy to listen to. Where everything else is assaulting my ears with tension and noise, the drums have these really cool melodic lines and infectious phrases. I love what they're doing, and to me, the drums elevate this beyond just being another emotionally heavy atmospheric track to something that has an extra layer of personality to it. And also gave me something to latch on to sonically to get away from some of the weight that was being presented through the rest of the instruments. Now, on that note, the other thing I wanted to talk about, what they do very well, undisputably, is atmosphere. I don't know why I brought that up like a question, but I did. The atmosphere in here is tangible. It's impossible not to feel it even from the get-go. Which I guess we gotta talk about the intro real quick. It started out, and I thought it was gonna be some sort of darker electronic, maybe industrial music. And then it was pure chaos noise, something closer to avant-garde experimental metal. And then we got into the groove, atmosphere, whatever this is, and it kind of set us up for the rest of the track from that point on. But from the beginning, I really had no idea what I was in store for. Every time I thought I knew what was coming up, I was totally wrong, and they continuously threw me these red herrings, and I'm kind of curious how people interpret the opening, like 45 seconds of this track. It's so many different things, and maybe those more familiar with Slift are like, yeah, this is just normal stuff for them. They like to do this, or maybe, it references other things that they've done. But for me, it was a bunch of false starts that had very little to do with the rest of the track, and it wasn't until we got into that first main riff at like 50 to 60 seconds in when we actually got into the track proper, what the rest of the 10 minutes of the song would be related to. Anyways, though, those last 10 minutes is all atmosphere. Heavy, distorted guitars, tense uh, note intervals, not a lot of chordal movement, just kind of this is a tense sound, let's stick with it. Maybe every 4 bars, hey, we have another tense sound. We've raised the pitches a little bit. It's not really moving to a new chord. I mean, technically it is, even if it's dyads or moving to a new chord. But then we usually bring it back down though, and it's sort of just series of tension. That's what a lot of this feels like to me. The drums are crunchy and massive. I say the bass is crunchy and massive. And the drums, as I mentioned, sort of lift everything a little bit. They provide some rhythmic contrast to the rigidity and slow movingness that the bass and the guitars tend to present. This weight, this tension is in every single aspect of the track, even if the atmosphere isn't the core focus. It is a secondary focus. It is still important to the song. There is no moment, I take that back. There is one moment when we get away from the tension, and it was like 4 bars, maybe around the 7 minute mark, and I remember I smiled. Maybe I smiled on the inside. I don't remember if I physically smiled, but I remember feeling light. I was like, this is nice. And they literally never revisited that idea. They gave us 4 bars of relief and said, that's it, you're done, back to the pit with you. And, uh, and it almost feels cruel. I think it would be less cruel to have just subjected me to the tension and weight and eeriness and discomfort of the track consistently than to give me that little false hope there in the middle. Now, as I mentioned, the atmosphere isn't the only thing going for it here. There are vocal parts. They're just kind of big and overbearing, kind of growly, raspy, aggressive vocals. They're actually not present too often, are they? A lot of this track is instrumental, and it does feel very much like a slow burn. There are a couple of points, though, where the atmosphere takes a back seat to melodic writing, which I thought was interesting. Early on, I guess it was about 3 or 4 minutes in, we had a dueling guitar duet. And I thought this was kind of neat because one guitar was doing more of a traditionally bluesy, hard rock kind of style, definitely with a metal tone, of course. Not really altering that much, but kind of going for an old school metal solo style. The other guitarist was going for a 60s psychedelic kind of style, lots of held out notes with bends. And hearing them clashing, going at the same time, not really doing anything that complements each other, was a really bizarre experience. I don't know how to really interpret it. Neither of the melodic composition that was being presented matched the tones of the instruments they were coming out of, and neither of these two ideas worked well together. It felt like sensory overload. I was just hearing a bunch of things and I couldn't piece together what they all meant as a unified idea. And it was sort of like you just have to experience them all separately, but the song doesn't allow for that. It shoves all of it in your face at one time and says, you get to deal with this right now. And it feels very antagonistic. There is very little in this track aside from some of the funner drum work that feels like it wants me to have a good time. And of course, all of this leads up to the outro, which is just wall of noise, tension, and distress, bouncing between 4 bars of just peak anxiety and then 4 bars of a lesser kind of anxiety. If the peak is 10, this is like a 6.5. It's still pretty bad. I didn't like it, but it was a nice relief from that utter bone crushing sound we experienced around it. And this is actually interesting because they did this previously as well, somewhere in the middle of the song, 5, 6 minutes in. We had this rising escalation to just peak dissonance and sonic filling of the sound sphere. And then they bring it back down to like a 7. And I even mentioned, this is still a really tense moment, but it's a relief for me. And this is what I talk about when, I bring up contrast and contrast allowing things to alter how they're perceived. If this had been tense, uh, 10, 10 out of 10 tension for 10 out of 10 tension. The entire track, it would eventually become the norm, and it would reach a point where it no longer feels as tense as it was when it started. But to create these varying levels of tension means that they can still play with pacing, um, tension and release, these typical narrative writing components, putting them in the song without ever really engaging with a sound that isn't this overbearing darkness. But by having these levels, these stages of this one feeling, they can still deliver the pacing, the highs and the lows of it. And so, what might feel tense in any other song was a moment of relief here, and I think that's phenomenal. It's a really cool thing that contrast can do. And they kind of foreshadowed the utter depths or peaks, I suppose, that we would explore at the end of the track in the middle, having this idea of contrasting a medium tension with a high tension and creating moments of tension and release, of building anticipation and then allowing some sort of dispersion of it. But the song never really lets it disperse entirely. There's never, aside from that one false hope, there's never a moment where you actually get to fully relax. And the song knows it, and they ride that high and pace it out properly to a point where it allows the listener to engage with these emotions without becoming overwhelmed by them. As I mentioned, this song could have very easily been one that wiped me out like some have in the past and just been emotionally drained when it was over, and instead I ended it feeling very comfortable. It was certainly a sound and a song and a length that I don't want to put myself back into anytime in the future. But when it was over, it's sort of like a roller coaster where it's a playful, controlled fear and adrenaline. This is a controlled level of tension. It never lets you get overwhelmed. It never wipes you out completely. But it does give you a safe space to explore these feelings. I'm going to take a moment to hit some lyrics and then we're going to wrap this up. Well, can't find any lyrics, so let's wrap this up. I'm just going to pretend that the lyrics are about being very tense and something overbearing all the time. Pretty easy topic to make a song about. So. Those are my thoughts on Slift's Ilion. Let me know what you thought of this track. Uh, Put it down in the comments. Your thoughts, perspectives, opinions, perspectives. I already said that. Anything else you want to add on to what I said? Above that, in the description box, there's a link for Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow. We're going to be checking out a full album. Otherwise, till next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.